To this day, the topics of sleep, dreams, and consciousness are sources of great fascination. Experts still aren't totally sure why we dream. Some propose that our dreams may help us process or sift through memories, solve problems, or regulate our emotions and mood. Others propose that they may simply be a byproduct of the more functional processes that take place during sleep. The idea that our dreams are to some extent our brains organizing the random firings of neurons could explain their often surreal qualities. However, dreams do usually involve aspects of our waking lives. A Freudian view is that our dreams can reveal our hidden fixations, anxieties, and desires. Recent studies suggest that most in the general public today believe their dreams can reveal meaningful insights. But as fascinating and strange as our typical dream lives are, one of the most unusual phenomenon is that of sleep paralysis.
So have you guys heard the term sleep paralysis before?
I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
But neither of you have had it.
No.
No, I've never had it before.
I've heard of it, but I don't know anyone that has had it.
I heard it's just like where you're sleeping and you wake up halfway.
A few people I have talked to about it kind of described either like pain in their limbs or just being like completely unable to move.
One of my friends had it one time. I tried to wake her up, but like she wouldn't wake up, so she's just laying there. She was looking around, and then like I wait 5 minutes later, and she goes, "Oh, I had sleep paralysis," and I'm like.
I've heard people describe it as like having somebody lay on them and like this feeling of like pressure.
I had this feeling of like horror in my chest. I could only just sort of barely move my eyes, and I would try to like yell for help, but I couldn't do anything.
It's kind of like if you're underwater and trying to come up for air, but you get to the surface and the surface just doesn't break.
I felt like I was short of breath the whole time.
Other people I've heard describe it as like having like a terrifying presence like nearby.
They had like a dark shadow in their room and it scared them.
It looked really vividly like a human figure.
I would feel a primal dread in that state.
It was like I was laying there and somebody was trying to get me, and if I did not get out of this paralyzed state soon, I was gonna die.
The nightmare is an old English term that's actually changed quite a bit in the past 100 years. Today, we think about a scary dream that you wake up. You might talk about, but it's really no big deal, but it is really a relatively recent invention. A classical nightmare meant that you would feel paralyzed, you would have an overwhelming sense of dread, and you would feel a weight or pressure on your chest and possibly be attacked by somebody. So our current nightmare is really a weak little shadow of the original nightmare.
This original definition of nightmare was included in Samuel Johnson's expansive Dictionary of the English Language in 1755. The entry read, "A morbid oppression in the night, resembling the pressure of weight upon the breast." With roots as far back as Old Norse mythology, the mare or mara was an entity in European folklore that gave its victims unpleasant dreams and rode their chests while they slept. The entity took diverse forms including demons, spirits, animals, people, old hags or witches, and even objects.
The original nightmare maps on really well to our modern day conception of sleep paralysis, and I've been able to find descriptions of it going back to ancient Greece.
This first known medical description came from 7th century Byzantine Greek physician Paul of Aegina in his medical compendium in 7 books. The actual term sleep paralysis was finally used in 1928 in S.A.K. Wilson's The Narcolepsies. Many people haven't heard of sleep paralysis or know very little about it, as we learned firsthand approaching strangers in downtown Manassas, Virginia. Most didn't even know enough about it to feel comfortable speaking on camera. However, we did find several people who had either experienced or knew someone who had experienced episodes.
An ex of mine had it, and in the night she would literally lock up and not be able to do anything. It's pretty rare, honestly. I'd say like 2 to 3 times a year. Fortunately, it wasn't anything like crazy. There's just a few times I did see it. It was very, very, very scary.
After high school, I was still living at home, and I'd come home after work and I'd lay down and take a nap, and then I'd hear my mother yelling to come down for dinner, and I couldn't move my body. I'd be in my back position when this happened, when I'd go into this, and then I would force myself to either roll off the bed or just to turn to my side to wake myself up. First, I was curious as to what was causing that and everything, but then I did hear the term years later and figured that's what it must have been.
Yeah, I've been lying in bed with my wife, and I'm staring at her, trying to get her to realize that I'm awake, but I can't move, I can't breathe, and it's disturbing.
To get a better sense of the symptoms and impacts of sleep paralysis, I asked mutual friends and social media contacts for anyone who had extensive or varied experiences.
I couldn't move any of my limbs, and I was really focused on trying to get my movement back. I felt kind of in a vegetable state. And then I also kind of felt like I couldn't breathe. It almost always happened after I lucid dreamed. I would figure out I'm dreaming, and then while in the dream, before I had the sleep paralysis, I would have kind of a similar claustrophobic feeling where I felt kind of acutely aware that everything around me wasn't real, and I was just on my bed at home. I was almost always trying to wake up in my dream, and then once I woke up, I realized I couldn't move, and then it was just an extra layer of that fear that I already felt when I was in the dream.
I had sleep paralysis throughout a lot of my childhood. The first memory I have of sleep paralysis was when I was 4 or 5 years old, and my mom was standing in the corner of the room. Couldn't move, couldn't talk, and I just didn't understand what was going on. I feel like I probably learned what it was in middle school. There was this painting, it's a classical painting, with a woman, she's
Oh, is it Fuseli's The Nightmare?
and there's a demon on her chest.
Yeah.
I remember that was I think the first time I learned about sleep paralysis.
Episodes of sleep paralysis have been reported to last from seconds to 20 minutes, with a mean time of around 6 minutes. However, it may be hard to judge the exact time in this state.
Time is this slippery thing that doesn't have any actual bearing in dream world, Jello land, and whatever you want to call it. That's honestly the easiest way to describe it. Is it's just, I'm here.
Sleep paralysis is a strange experience of how sleep can go wrong. So essentially what happens when you go to sleep, you have different stages of sleep. One of these is called rapid eye movement sleep, and this is the one most associated with dreaming.
Named for the quick movement of our eyes as we sleep, the REM phase occurs with increasing frequency during each 90-minute cycle. The first occurs after about 90 minutes, and usually lasts about 10 minutes, with later periods lasting up to 1 hour. Overall, we spend about a fourth of each night's sleep in REM. REM is also known as paradoxical sleep because of its physiological similarities to wakefulness. Although neurons fire at a similar intensity, connectivity between parts of the brain works differently. This helps to explain the looser, more random quality of our dream thought processes. Active areas of the brain include those linked with emotion, fear, memory, and desire. Also characteristic of REM is the near-total muscle paralysis called muscle atonia.
Our body paralyzes us so that we don't act out our dreams, presumably. So when we have sleep paralysis, we actually have waking consciousness, but we have those two aspects of REM sleep, but they're going on when we're awake. So we're paralyzed, and we're also having those dream images.
Sleep paralysis is thus currently thought of as an overlapping state between REM sleep and waking. Although the exact mechanisms behind why some experience this overlapping state have yet to be fully identified, it is thought by researchers to relate to disrupted sleep-wake cycles and dysfunction in sleep phase transitions. It has been linked to irregular or poor quality sleep, sleep disorders including sleep apnea and narcolepsy, psychiatric disorders, and stress. Research also supports a genetic factor playing a role in some cases, so certain people may be more predisposed to sleep paralysis than others. A troubling aspect of SP for all three of our interviewees was that their episodes were almost always scary.
Even when there's not anything there, I still feel afraid. It almost feels intrinsic. And maybe it's because I've had so many horrifying experiences in that space. It could also be maybe there's something about that space itself that triggers fear and makes it more likely for you to see things.
Although not every aspect of how episode progression occurs is clear, and a good variety of experiences are reported, research supports the idea that episodes contain a sort of positive feedback loop. In one paper, Cambridge University neuroscientist Bilal Jalal presented a model of how this may occur called the panic hallucination model. Drawing on this and other researchers' similar ideas, here's a simplified rundown of how episodes may progress. First, you wake up in this vulnerable paralyzed state. Due to REM muscle paralysis and shallow rapid respiration, attempts to move or breathe deeply are met with resistance and further symptoms of tightness and pressure. Additionally, the parts of the brain that detect threats are hypersensitive in this state. Jalal summarizes this whole process by pointing out that hallucinations appear to be driven by the combination of these factors with the resulting fearful emotions and panic. Although not all sufferers experience the hallucinations, research shows that a great portion do, and that these episodes often involve a sensed presence that is fleshed out as they progress.
You usually will wake up and you'll just sense a presence in the room, almost like you're, walking down a dark street in DC, and you might feel like you're being watched. And then our brain seems to organize that, and then we will see something, start hearing something, and then it might progress in some cases to actually feeling like you're being physically touched or attacked.
There really was a feeling of dread or terror. It felt like not something like just kind of in the distance. It felt like it was looming over you, ready to attack. It was kind of like a horror movie where something like gets closer and closer to you, and like the tension builds up as it gets closer. It was really just the feeling that somebody was coming to get me, and I had to like quickly get out of this state to like save myself.
It's really terrifying if you're paralyzed and you're experiencing something scary, because you're at that moment total prey. There's nothing you can do. You're completely at the mercy of whatever you think is attacking you, which, not surprisingly, a number of people will report actually having panic attacks during sleep paralysis because it gets so scary.
Repeating loops of fear, symptoms of panic, and scary hallucinations may further escalate or draw out episodes. They may then be interpreted through the sufferer's socio-cultural framework. Another notable aspect of this feedback loop is that future episodes may then become more likely and more intense. This is due to the conditioned fear that may make sufferers more alert to arousals during sleep and more panicked during subsequent attacks.
If you do a statistical procedure called a factor analysis with all the different symptoms, they cluster into 3 groups. So one is called the intruder, and this is where you'll have that sensed presence I talked about, and you'll have some fear. Then you've got the incubus, which is the one associated with feeling pressure on the chest.
The incubus male and succubus female were demons in folklore that would lie upon, press down on, or attack sleepers, usually to engage in sexual activity. One study's findings showed that women were more likely than men to experience episodes in this category as intensely negative.
So then the third type is called vestibular motor hallucinations. This is where you feel that your body is being moved but without you trying to move it. So you might feel that you're being levitated or you're floating.
Some interpret these vestibular motor hallucinations as out-of-body experiences or astral projection. Somewhat related is the question of what our eyes are doing during SP episodes. There is evidence in the literature as well as anecdotal evidence that many are able to open their eyes and see a meshing of dream imagery with their surroundings. Others seem to see a dream representation of their surroundings while their eyes remain closed. How much these experiences vary case by case is striking. However, there are certain hallucinations that are common. In a study of college students with sleep paralysis by Sharpless, many responded that they had seen a being or person in the room with them during episodes, and rated these hallucinations an average of about 6 of 8 on a scale of fear. About a fourth of them had seen a non-human, and over a fifth had seen a person. Of those who saw human beings during episodes, 40% had seen someone they knew in real life.
I would have a conversation with someone that never happened, or someone would come in, but I'd be laying in my bed, unable to move, and then they would come talk to me, and then they would disappear or something nonsensical would happen.
They look and sound just as real as I do to you right now. And in contrast to normal dreams, which are usually scary only about maybe 30% of the time, sleep paralysis hallucinations are scary 80 to 90% of the time.
Hallucinations reported in Sharpless's study included hooded humanoids, animals, indistinct creatures, and spirits.
And the most common hallucination of figures that people saw was a shadow person.
The most vivid hallucination I had was when I saw a figure rising up, like to my left. It really did feel human-like. It was more of a blue glowing silhouette. When I woke up, I realized it was just some blue light coming from lights outside of my room. The times that I didn't think something was coming for me, I was very aware of my surroundings compared to that time where it felt like I was just like, in some horror movie trying to get out.
Most of the time when I would see a figure in sleep paralysis, it would be this dark, not quite solid, floating figure, almost like a dementor is the easiest way to explain it. Really long and skinny and like always like never like grounded on the ground, never like standing, but like in the air. And it would always be like, so if I'm laying in bed, okay, it would always be like this, like coming down from the ceiling to like meet its face to mine. Its features were, if there were any features, it was usually just a mouth. I never really got the typical like pressure in my chest. It would be a lot in my face and almost like a sucking. And maybe it's just pulling back to that Dementor idea. I was really into Harry Potter when I was young, but it was always just very like and terrifying.
If you look at the general population, a little over 7% of people will experience it at least once, but there are much higher percentages of students and psychiatric patients. And we're still trying to figure out exactly why, but we think that both of those groups of folks have more disrupted sleep.
My sleeping habits near the end of high school were pretty bad. I've always had a history of insomnia, so my sleep habits were never really consistent at that time.
Since sleep paralysis is in many cases linked to sleep cycle disruptions or poor sleeping habits, there are a number of sleep hygiene recommendations that can decrease your chances of having episodes.
Going to bed at a regular time each night makes it easier for you to go right off to sleep instead of lying awake long into the night.
These include getting a regular 7 to 9 hours per night, avoiding drugs and alcohol for several hours before sleep, avoiding caffeine past 2 p.m., keeping electronics and light exposure outside the bedroom, avoiding lengthy late afternoon naps, not eating within 2 hours of sleep, daily exercise, and engaging in calming routines before bed.
Getting ready for bed at a regular time is one of the most important habits you can learn. A quiet hour or two before bedtime is part of this habit. It makes you feel relaxed and sleepy, ready for bed.
Meditation has also been reported to help with sleep paralysis and nocturnal arousal. Long-term practitioners have been found to get higher quality sleep. A recommendation specific to sleep paralysis is to avoid sleeping on your back. This is the position in which sleep paralysis episodes are more likely to occur. This position makes microarousals during sleep more likely. This may be due to collapsed tissue in the upper airways, as well as the greater compressive force on the chest inherent to this position. However, in a study from the University of Waterloo, many were found to wake up in this position to SP after having fallen asleep in a different one, so it may be wise to take extra precautions to prevent movement onto your back. It's worth repeating that sleep paralysis may sometimes run in families, so some may be more predisposed to it. Certain underlying conditions may also be responsible.
If you've ever heard of narcolepsy, that's one of the core features of it. So people that have narcolepsy suffer for this all the time.
One of our interviewees was diagnosed with a type of narcolepsy after our interview.
Yeah, I first started having excessive daytime tiredness around 13. The symptoms didn't get really bad until I was like probably 17.
Narcolepsy with cataplexy is a rare neurological disorder where a neurochemical regulating one's sleep-wake cycles is at a lower level than normal. Experts say this may be the result of an autoimmune reaction. This reaction is thought to occur due to a combination of environmental and genetic factors. More rarely, narcolepsy may be the result of a brain injury. Symptoms of type 1 narcolepsy include excessive daytime sleepiness, sudden REM sleep that can occur at any time of day and immediately after falling asleep, auditory or visual hallucinations coming in or out of sleep,
Hypnogogic, hope I'm pronouncing that right, hallucinations as I'm falling asleep, and only when I'm falling asleep, and it's just my brain going into REM sleep super quickly, and so I'm kind of like on the edge of being awake and being asleep, and I hear banging noises, and I'll see weird images.
Then there's cataplexy.
Sometimes your limbs just go limp like it would if you were sleeping. And it's very mild for me. When someone like surprises me or shocks me or I get super overwhelmed very suddenly, my hands will go numb.
Disturbed sleep at night, and in up to half of narcoleptics, sleep paralysis. Due to the narcoleptic tendency to enter REM sleep quickly or immediately, Ella experienced many of her sleep paralysis episodes while going into sleep rather than upon waking.
But when you go into sleep so quickly, you become very familiar with what it is to dream. It's really hard to explain, but it's like I'm awake while being in a sleeping body, and my mind is like having some dreamland influence.
Isolated sleep paralysis is when it occurs outside of the context of other medical conditions and using substances or certain side effects of medications.
Unless our other interviewees had symptoms of narcolepsy I'm unaware of, their experiences most likely fall into this category.
When I was having it the most, I would say it was like every 2 to 3 weeks. I had that frequently for like a few months, and then it kind of went back down to like once every 2 months or so, and then it kind of stopped.
A small percentage of people that do have sleep paralysis, somewhere between 15 and 45%, depending on the study, they have it to the extent that it causes problems in their life.
This is when episodes may be called recurrent isolated sleep paralysis. RISP involves clinically significant fear and somewhat frequent episodes.
So either they have it so much that it ends up disrupting their sleep, making them fear the bedroom, make them fear going to bed, or they might just develop some unhealthy beliefs about what's going on that might cause them further distress or interfere with their lives.
These avoidance behaviors and beliefs may contribute to conditioned fear of sleep paralysis, increasing the likelihood of future episodes. Those with frequent sleep paralysis are more likely than occasional experiencers to have more vivid hallucinatory experiences, as well as to have sequential episodes. Balan Jalal of Cambridge University took this aspect of belief and fear to a cultural level in one study. Comparing sleep paralysis episodes and associated beliefs in Denmark versus Turkey, he found that in Turkey, episodes were more often viewed as supernatural and involved higher rates, longer and more frequent attacks, and more intense fear. In Denmark, episodes were more often viewed simply as an unusual physiological phenomenon. Jalal interpreted these findings as demonstrating that both personal and cultural beliefs can influence how sleep paralysis is interpreted and how much it is feared. It also suggested that heightened fear can prolong episodes and make them occur more often. Although he says he reached a significantly high level of fear in some individual attacks, our interviewee Evan seems to fall in the category of a less fearful long-term response.
Since I knew that this was something that would only last a minute at most, I would always panic and I would always freak out, but at least I knew eventually I'll be able to move again. After it happened, I would try to walk around my room for a bit to get over the feeling. When things like that happen, the first thing I do is look up what the actual cause was. So even I never interpret it oh, there was a ghost there.
I think in a large number of cases when I interview people and we talk about it and they understand that it's not that strange, and B, it's not dangerous, I think they are comforted. But I think there is a percentage of people that even if they do have a scientific explanation for it, still hold on to the supernatural explanation. I think people have to make sense of these strange experiences, and sleep in general is very mysterious. And when you have weird sleep experiences like sleep paralysis, it's doubly mysterious. So you use the categories that are around you to make sense of it. So, if you're a very religious person, you might think you had a spiritual event. If you believe in extraterrestrials, possibly alien abductions, you might sort of use that as an explanation. If you're a scientifically inclined person, you might start doing research and try to figure out that it's essentially a strange happening in your sleep.
Quite a few creatures and beings in folklore and pop culture have links to sleep paralysis.
It's interesting because the core features of the nightmare really don't shift across culture, but the way that people interpret the experiences does. So, for instance, in Cambodia, they might call it the ghost that presses you down. In Zanzibar, you might be visited by the Popabawa, which is this giant black bat that comes out of the jungle and lays on top of you as you sleep. Scholars and researchers have associated sleep paralysis with a number of supernatural entities from myth, folklore, so vampires, werewolves, demons, witches, aliens, shadow people, so it really runs the gamut.
In the tradition of the Mara, and specifically old hag attacks, from the 15th century through the 18th century, some of these nocturnal visitations were linked to witches. In both Europe and the New World, people were accused of being witches who were in league with the devil and tormented their neighbors. One example of this comes from the 1692 to 1693 Salem witch trials in colonial Massachusetts.
Looking through the court testimony, several of the people gave evidence that was very consistent with what we would call today sleep paralysis.
The Puritan minister Cotton Mather's Wonders of the Invisible World contained several accounts from Salem that resemble episodes and were used as testimony against a woman named Bridget Bishop. One particularly striking testimony was from a man named John Louder. He claimed to have experienced a nocturnal visitation from Bishop.
And she visited him in a pretty horrifying way. She laid on top of him and strangled him all night, and he could do nothing about it.
According to court records, Louder confronted Bishop about this, but she denied it and threatened him. He then claimed that sometime later, while being not very well during the day, he was visited by a black pig and a talking monkey-like creature. Several others accused Bishop of similar nocturnal visits and various other incidents, including supposed apparition sightings and odd fits.
Unfortunately for Miss Bishop, she was the first person that was hanged in Salem.
Sleep paralysis is just one of the probable misinterpretations and deceptions that may have led to accusations of witchcraft. Testimony of this nature was used as part of what was called spectral evidence, meaning based on dreams or visions, during the first year of the Salem trials. Sleep paralysis appearances and references in literature are also numerous. Many authors were clearly influenced by either their own experiences or the stories of others' episodes. They may have been influenced by previous writing on the topic, or perhaps even by first-hand accounts. In nonfiction writings, Edgar Allan Poe revealed his own interest in states blending dreams with the waking world. This interest was clear in his fiction as well. A classic episode was described in his 1838 narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, involving paralysis and a large fanged monster on the narrator's chest. An episode was recounted in vivid detail in Herman Melville's 1851 novel Moby Dick. The passage read, "I opened my eyes and the before sunlit room was now wrapped in outer darkness. Instantly I felt a shock running all through my frame. Nothing was to be seen and nothing was to be heard, but a supernatural hand seemed placed in mine. My arm hung over the counterpane, and the nameless, unimaginable silent form or phantom to which the hand belonged seemed closely seated by my bedside. For what seemed ages piled on ages, I lay there, frozen with the most awful fears, not daring to drag away my hand, yet ever thinking if I could but stir one single inch, the horrid spell would be broken." Another famous figure who wrote about the phenomenon was J.M. Barrie, best known as the author of Peter Pan. Besides the interest in dream states his stories demonstrated, an 1887 newspaper article detailed childhood experiences that sound very much like sleep paralysis episodes. Barrie described his nightmare taking various forms, including a bedsheet that tried to choke him, and a heavy mass that pinned him down to his bed. F. Scott Fitzgerald's 1922 novel The Beautiful and the Damned contained a long passage that at its conclusion captured the end of an episode. Blood rushed back into her limbs, blood and life together. With a start of energy, she sat upright, shifting her body until her feet touched the floor over the side of the bed. Another aspect of sleep paralysis that's still ambiguous is its treatment.
Some of the historical treatments for it were pretty fun. They might shave your head, they might make you drink vinegar, and as we all know, there's nothing that can't be cured with a good bleeding. So they used venesection and would bleed people to try and cure their nightmares. In general, the placebo effect's probably the most powerful effect in medicine, so it's at play in a lot of drugs, which is, and really any sort of treatment in general, which is why you always want to control for that as best as possible. Unfortunately, there's not much grant money to study this, so there hasn't been a single large-scale clinical trial for treating sleep paralysis, so we're really left with small case studies and things like that, but there are a few options available, so one of the side effects of antidepressants is that it actually suppresses REM sleep. So when you take that normally, it's a side effect, but you can actually use the side effect to help treat it for people that have chronic sleep paralysis. I developed a psychotherapy, a very short-term psychotherapy based on the cognitive behavioral model to help people both prevent and disrupt sleep paralysis episodes when they happen. We try to alter their sleep hygiene. We have them pay attention to their patterns of sleep, when they might be more likely to get sleep paralysis episodes. And then we also teach them ways to disrupt the episodes when they occur. So in a previous study, I asked people, since I was trying to figure out how to treat it, I asked the people that had it, I said, well, what do you do? And does it actually work?
For the most part, they end it with me like snapping myself out of them, so to say. It was just me really focusing on moving one part of your body.
So maybe trying to wiggle your toe or trying to move your pinky or something like that.
Kind of like in the scene in Kill Bill, where she was really focused on moving her toe. I'd be really focused on like moving my finger or something, and then eventually I'll get movement back, and then I'll just snap into it, and like I'll wake up.
We're still trying to collect data to see how effective that is, but it might help them get out of it quicker, or it might distract them from the scary hallucinations, which again could be good on its own, I think.
Remaining as calm as possible was reported to be a successful strategy for some as well. Another proposed treatment, recently developed by Bilal Jalal of Cambridge, was MR therapy for SP. This treatment differs from Sharpless's approach in its episode disruption recommendations. It explicitly discourages trying to move limbs or breathe deeply. This comes from the neuroscientist's hypotheses on episode progression. He wrote that attempted movement could lead to worsened somatic symptoms or odd bodily hallucinations, and thus heightened discomfort and panic. Instead, his approach encourages meditation on positive inward thoughts coupled with muscle relaxation to ride episodes out or fall back asleep. He recommends beginning this process by staying calm and telling oneself that these attacks and hallucinations are common, all while keeping one's eyes closed. Practicing meditation techniques outside of episodes is also recommended. He hypothesizes that overall this method will shift attention in a positive direction and reduce the mechanisms that heighten one's terror. In his paper, Jalal included descriptions of 2 promising cases using MR therapy so far. The practitioners were both able to reduce or modify hallucinations, as well as become less fearful of attacks in general. One of them began to experience fewer episodes as well.
The treatment that I developed, CBTI, SP, it has a bit more emphasis on prevention, and also with a number of the common parts of cognitive behavioral therapy, so self-monitoring, educating the patient about the nature of the disorder, what causes it, and things like that. But there is a good degree of overlap. But unfortunately, neither of them as of yet have been able to be studied in long-term trials.
In any case, another notable aspect of sleep paralysis is the unlikelihood of sufferers to seek treatment in the first place.
I mean, I've always been bad at like going to see a doctor about something anyway. I think it was just like I kind of got lucky and got over it. And even when I had it, I was kind of just accepting like, I have this now. I wasn't like really trying to fix it, I guess. Maybe because I understood it, it never really caused me distress outside of the times I had it. I wasn't happy about it, but I wasn't like, this is the end of the world. Like, I need to get this fixed immediately.
Even those with fairly frequent and intense sleep paralysis tend not to tell doctors about their experiences.
I'm 25 and I'm just seeing a neurologist. Most of my life I never really talked about this.
Sharpless shared his own fairly recent personal experience with sleep paralysis.
I had studied it for years, and I've never had an episode, but when I went over to England to give a talk on sleep disorders, it was the same year that The Nightmare came out, the Rodney Asher documentary, and my publisher asked me to review it. So I got home and I was really jet lagged because there was an 8 or 9 hour time difference from there. And I was drinking wine that night, and I was jet lagged and watching a movie about sleep paralysis. And so I turned in very early and woke up, and I looked over and my bedroom door swung open, and I saw this looked like a ninja mask with red eyes and very long neck, and it slowly came in the room and started looking at me. And so I looked at it and said, oh my God, you're having sleep paralysis. And so I knew what it was, and it wasn't that scary because I knew what it was, but it was very interesting. I watched it for a couple of minutes, and then as soon as I could move, it magically went away. So I went downstairs, worked out. My girlfriend was still asleep. And so she came down finally, and I said, hey, you're never going to believe it. I had sleep paralysis. And then she said to me, I just had sleep paralysis too. Now, even though I'm a skeptic, I'm not going to lie to you, I did think for a second, did she actually see that ninja mask thing too? But she didn't. She didn't have any hallucinations. It is just as vivid as anything else that would happen in your life, so I totally understand how people can be terrified and think that it's something other than it is. I think in general, sleep paralysis is an interesting window into studying sleep in general, but also hallucinations. And you can study hallucinations in people that aren't psychotic.
I'm at Northern Virginia Community College. I'm hanging out in the lunchroom. Two guys walk up to me and they just start chatting. It was a little weird. I felt like they were about to start proselytizing. The guy tells me I used to do like 3 tabs of LSD every single day. I was doing it for like 6 months, and then one day I'm falling asleep and I see a witch and it's sitting on my chest and she's laughing. And then he's like, I just freaked out. I was on too much acid, or he's coming down, I guess. And then he's like, I just started praying, and then the witch left. So that's how I found God. And you said you smoked weed once, so maybe you can find God the same way. And then looking back on him, like, that dude just had sleep paralysis, but I guess it worked out for him because he stopped tripping every day. So
I think we still have a lot to learn. Being a clinical psychologist, I'm very interested in how these experiences affect people and how we can help them. So I think we need more research into those aspects.
I would say the biggest thing was the feeling of claustrophobia, like I'm stuck in my own body, was kind of the biggest thing, and I couldn't really get over that. And of course, like, after the fact, I realized that I was fine no matter how long it took, but while I was in there, it was pretty scary, you know?
In the sense that it's Jello land, that I can't really do much, that I can't really control what's going on. I can't really just go, and then the thing is gone. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just kind of like I'm along for the ride a little bit, but I'm very aware that I'm on a roller coaster. I think staying calm has improved a lot, and at one point, I think a turning point for me was this is probably about 6 months ago. I had a sleep paralysis episode with one of these creatures, and I actually interacted with it the best I could. I think it kind of let me have more control. As I become a more secure person and less afraid of a person, I am seeing less and less in my dreams. Treating it like something you can interact with and maybe learn from will probably be useful. I don't even really think it ever tortured me. It might have made me a little scared the next morning, a little shooken up, but I never was I never felt scarred by it. It's just how I am. As sometimes, all the time, sleep is weird.